أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها؟ هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك، ولا المعروف من فضلك، ولا مشبه لما عاملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك، فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك، وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك، لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما، وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما، لكنك تقدست أسماؤك، أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين، وأن تجل ثناؤك، قلت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما، أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي، فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها، وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها، أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمت، وكل ذنب أذنبت، وكل قبيح أسررته، وكل جهل عملت، كتمته أو أعلنت، أخفيته أو أظهرت، وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني، وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيته، وبفضلك سترته، وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلته، أو إحسان فضلته، أو بر نشرته، أو رزق بسطته، أو ذنب تغفره، أو خطأ تستره، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة، وبخدمتك موصولة، وأعمالي عندك مقبولة، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا، وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا، يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، قوي على خدمتك جوارحي، واشتد على العزيمة جوانحي، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك، حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين، وأسرع إليك في البارزين، وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين، وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين، وأخافك مخافة الموقنين، وأجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرد، ومن كادني فكد، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك، وأقربهم منزلة منك وأخصهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك، وجد لي بجودك، وأعطف علي بمجدك، واحفظني برحمتك، واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا، وقلبي بحبك متيما، ومن علي بحسن إجابتك، وأقلني يثرتي واغفر زلتي، فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك، وأمرتهم بدعائك، وضمنت لهم الإجابة. فإليك يا ربي نسبت وجهي، وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي، وبلغني مناي، ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي. يا سريع الرضا، يا سريع الرضا، يا سريع الرضا، اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء، فإنك فعال لما تشاء، يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى، ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاحه البكاء، يا سابغ النعم، يا دافع النقام، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام، يا عالما لا يعلم. صل على محمد وآل محمد، وافعل بما أنت أهله، وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم صل أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم، إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم، تنزيل العزيز الرحيم، لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون، لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون. إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون، وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون. وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون، إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب، فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم. إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم، وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ أرسلنا إليهم 2 فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون. قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون. قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين. قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم. قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون. وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أأتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا ونطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات الله وسلامه على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. May we recite Surah Al-Fatiha for Marhum Yusuf Ali Jesse, inshallah. Al-Fatiha. Allahumma salli
To come in, you're welcome into the Salah area so we can have our joint program inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So the same as last week, the opening verse for our series is Surah An-Nisa, chapter number 4, verse number 29. Chapter number 4, verse number 29. We will be using it for our discussion tonight as well, inshallah. So if you want to have it open, then we can utilize it as before. For the love of our Holy Prophet, let us have a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Alhamdulillahi alladhi hadana li hadha wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin. خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل إلا أن تكون تجارة عن تراض منكم ولا تقتلوا أنفسكم إن الله كان بكم رحيما آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight we continue in our the second part of our series looking at Islamic business laws and the rules of Fiqh al-Uqud, those contracts that we get into in our lifetime, whether it be a contract as an employer or as an employee, or whether it is going to be a marriage contract, be you a man or a woman. All of these come under Fiqh al-Uqud and the types of contracts that we will enter into. Last week, by virtue of introduction, we covered the following points. Number one, the importance of this subject, and where in the Quran, in Ahadith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam have spoken about the importance of this particular subject matter. We also mentioned that the opinion of our Maraja al-Kiram is that for some it is mustahab for us to be able to learn these rules for ourselves, and for others it is wajib for us to learn these rules. For example, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Hussein As-Sistani, may Allah preserve him, in his Risala Amaliyah, he states that it is recommended to learn these laws, but if these laws that you and I face on a daily basis, we fear out of ignorance of a law that is upon us, we will enter into a haram act, then it becomes wajib for us to be able to learn these laws. Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi, may Allah protect him, he said no, it is not just if you fear falling into sin, rather all of these laws that affect you and I on a daily basis relative to our work, relative to our field, relative to our speciality, we are obligated to learn those particular rulings. And so we can see the importance of this subject matter. We then talked about 3 categories of rulings. Who can remember the 3 different categories of rulings? What was the first category of ruling? Any of the 3. Who can remember any of the 3 categories of the rulings? So, technically, yes, there are some rulings that will be mubah, but we categorized 3 types of rulings where we said some rulings, the marajit will say something, some they won't say something. So the first category of ruling are those in which you and I are free to be able to make whatever contracts we want. We're completely free. And it's based upon this verse from Surah An-Nisa, verse number 29, that as long as there is taradi baynana, as long as we are consenting, we are satisfied that we have entered into this contract or we have entered into this commitment, whatever those stipulations are, we are happy with that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the freedom to be able to act. So the first type of ruling are those which are with taradi. Taradi means consent and satisfaction. The second type of ruling will be when the maraji' provide us with a principle. And they say, here is the principle. We cannot tell you whether you fall within the principle or outside of it. You, as the person making the contract, or you, the businessman or woman, or you, the community, have to understand whether this is falling within the principle or outside of the principle. So for example, last week we introduced one of those principles by name. Qa'idat gharar. Gharar was what? Risk. Not just risk. Undue risk. A type of risk that is so risky that rational people would find it unacceptable for you to perform this type of risk. Gharar. This is a principle. Now the marja is not an expert in business. The marja is not a specialist in the commodity that you are purchasing. He or she cannot tell you this falls within gharar or not. All they can say is, there is the principle of gharar. This is the second type of ruling. The third type of ruling was where the maraji' will actually give you a specific law and say this is permissible or not permissible. This is makruh, this is mustahab, or whatever it may be. And last week we looked at one example. Advanced payments. Bay' as-salam. Do you remember? So we said a person wants to purchase something 3 months in advance, 6 months in advance, whatever it is. It has to have certain conditions. You need to know what you're purchasing. It needs to be specified in its quantity. It needs to be specified in its quality, in the date in which it is reaching you, in the value of it. Because if you don't specify those things, it falls into the problem of gharar. It's too risky. You're purchasing something, you haven't specified what you're purchasing. Now, of course, none of us would do that, really, I would hope to think. No business person is going to say, I'm purchasing 3 months of supplies for my business in advance. It's going to come, but I don't specify a date. Or I don't know what the quality is of what I'm purchasing. But here it's a simple example of how to navigate between the 3 principles. The first, that you have taradi, that you have consent. Second, that there is a principle. And third, that you have to have certain rulings that will be upon you. What we'll do tonight, inshallah, is we will do 2 things. Number 1 is we will just expand on some of those principles. We'll mention maybe 4 or 5 of those principles so that at least you get to know those principles. And then what we'll try to do is apply those principles into different areas of common life when we purchase things, when we sell things, when we engage in contracts. We will look at, number 1, who can make a contract? As an example, Nazir, with his age, is he allowed to be able to make a contract? Can he independently buy and sell? Can he make himself a will? Can he go into the shops and buy something? If yes, to what extent? Can Nazir buy a PlayStation for his room? Why not? We'll talk about this. The second thing is, if you want to withdraw from a contract, let's say you've purchased something, you're no longer happy with it, you want to return it back to the shops. What are the Islamic rulings on when you can return something and when the seller can accept or dispute your returning something? This is quite important. Constantly you and I are buying and selling, and sometimes we return home, we find that what we purchased isn't what we wanted, isn't fitting. We were promised something different, or I just don't like the item anymore. Some of us, we buy 4 or 5 things from Amazon, we want to test it out, we decide which one is the right one for us, we return 4 of them. Does Islam permit this? Can you return like this? We'll talk about this. And then inshallah we'll talk about what your contracts can and cannot be made up of. So hopefully we'll get through all of that tonight. It shouldn't be too long. But we need to start with 4 or 5 principles that will allow us to navigate those topics. Because once you know what Quran and Ahlul Bayt alayhimussalam have stipulated about principles, some of these masail become much easier. You go back to the principle answers your question for you in the majority of the time. Where it doesn't, it requires marja maybe to tell us the specific ruling. We'll try to look at some of those as well, time permitting, across our time for the next half hour inshallah. Let us begin with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So I'm going to ask you to open up your phones or the notepads that you brought with you, and I want you to be able to write down maybe 4 or 5 principles that are principles in fiqh, what are known as qawa'id fiqhiyya. These are specifically principles that run through all the chapters of mu'amalat and uqud, all the chapters of contractual law that have come to us from Ahlul Bayt alayhimussalam, and that our maraji' will go back to when they have to deal with a mas'ala. And so they will teach you this, or the books will teach you this, in order to be able to navigate your own business transactions. I'll give you 4 or 5 very briefly, and as the weeks go on, we'll expand on them inshallah. So don't feel like if you don't know all about it tonight, we will try to be able to move forward. Principle number 1. الناس مسلطون على أموالهم. People have a right and an authority over their own wealth. Principle number 1. You have the right to be able to spend whatever you want. Principally. Remember, this is a principle, yes? Principle number 1. الناس مسلطون على أموالهم. People have authority over their own wealth. Principle number 2. كل شيء حلال حتى تعرف أنه حرام. Everything is halal until proven haram. If you want to purchase something, the principle is it's halal. It's permissible for you to purchase it until you have knowledge, ilm, proof to say otherwise. And remember, these are principles. You walk into a butcher, is everything halal for you? No. You need to know the opposite, don't you? Because you're talking about a specific now, the food that you are consuming. But by and large, the principle stands that whatever you want to purchase is halal for you. You don't need to go and ask so many questions that's going to put you into difficulty. It's permissible for you to buy things until you know otherwise. Principle number 2. Principle number 3. قاعدة الضرر. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa said, لا ضرر ولا ضرار. Islam does not occasion harm. Islam does not occasion harm. What does this mean? Islam does not permit harm to come to you through your transactions, or your transactions to cause harm to others. If your transaction or the contract that you're going to engage in leaves you open to serious harm or abuse, at that point your contract is invalid, or the contract can be broken. Similarly, if you try to create a contract that harms another person's rights, immediately the contract is batil, even if you consent, even if they consent. This is called qa'idat dharar, no harm. Principle number 3. Principle number 4, the one we mentioned last week and earlier on, qa'idat gharar. Islam does not occasion undue risk, illogical risk. And last, for the time being, for tonight's introduction, 5th principle, كل ما يوافق مع القرآن والسنة فهو جائز. Whatever corresponds with the Quran and Sunnah, it is permissible for you. كل ما يوافق مع القرآن والسنة فهو جائز. Which obviously you can infer the opposite. Anything that goes against the Quran or against the Sunnah, it is haram for you. Now these 5 principles, there are many, many more, but I'm giving you 5 because it's actually really useful. These 5 are very foundational to fiqh al-mu'amalat, the laws of transactions and contract law. A lot of our questions, a lot of our disputes, a lot of our own protections in business and contracts can be answered by one of these 5 qawa'id, principles. Make sense? At this point, are there any questions just about these 5?
Two is not clear, like regarding the halal, if you go in the shop to buy anything, what you do some dealings, so how it's halal. Like
Ahsant. Okay, so principle number 2. كل شيء حلال حتى تعرف أنه حرام. Everything is halal until you know otherwise. This is a hadith of our 6th Imam, Jaffer Ladak, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala. Which is considered by all fuqaha to be sahih, and everybody is in agreement that it is a principle in fiqh al-uqud. It's a very nice question. The principle is that, imagine you want to purchase any item. I walk into a shop, I see an item, and I want to be able to purchase it. Or I'm in the shop and I want to sell the item. It's a pair of speakers. Speakers often are used for music. So for example, you work in a shop that looks after cars, fixes up cars, puts in stereos, puts in speakers. Just as an example. You see a youth walk in. Person says, I want to buy this stereo system. Immediately in your and my mind is, brother's going to be playing some banging reggae. Yeah? And he's going to use it to pick up all the chicks, and what's he going to do with it? And in your mind, can I sell this to him? He doesn't look kosher. Are you allowed to sell it to him? Go back to the principle. كل شيء حلال حتى تعرفوا أنه حرام. It is permissible for you until you know and prove otherwise. Now, if you know that this guy is a well-known gangster, that normally would probably try to, I don't know where I'm going. They try to sell things. He tried to rip you off, and he tried to, I don't know. He wants to be able to purchase a load of equipment from you, and he's well known that he's going to, ship it out illegally to, Africa. Then what? Is it halal or haram upon you? Which one? Haram. Why? Because you know that he is engaged in haram act. So with the knowledge that is present in front of you, you don't need to do any more investigation into your situation. If there is new situation, new knowledge that comes to light that changes what you know, then that information is admissible. You have to factor it into your situation. But principally, whatever you know at the time of your purchase is sufficient for your knowledge as to whether this action is halal or haram for you. But then we mentioned that when it comes to purchasing food, you know that there are certain types of food that are haram for you. You have to make sure that that food doesn't contain something haram for you. So that's when the principle differs. But in other contracts, as long as you are, as far as your knowledge goes, that this action is halal, it's sufficient for you. You don't need to investigate it any further. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's a bit of an example, but you get the example that I'm trying to use, inshallah. Any other questions on these 5 qawa'id fiqhiyya? If any come to your mind later, you can always put it on the menti or ask it as you feel comfortable later on, inshallah. So, these are 5 principles that we can use that help us to be able to navigate. And all of these come from statements of Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam. So, it's easy for us to verify them, but it's also very logical about these particular principles in mu'amalat, in transaction laws. So now, if you want to open your phones, whoever wants to read from their phones, we sent through 3 chapters that we're going to be studying briefly from the work of Ayatollah Sayyid Fadil Husseini Milani, may Allah preserve him, and the book that we are studying in this course, Islamic Commercial Law by Sayyid Milani. So it might be a little bit difficult for you to read on your phones, but it's there for you as reference. But we're going to talk about it and try to apply these 5 different qawa'id fiqhiyya as much as we can, very, very briefly. So the first section we talked about in the, not the printouts, but the attachments for you, was who can make a contract, right? Now you can see on page 1 there that there are 5 conditions to anyone who wants to make a contract. There is debate on the meaning of all of these, and you can always go into nuance. But principally, it should be fairly sufficient for you, these 5 principles. Number 1, the person should be of puberty or the ability to distinguish what he or she is purchasing, which we'll come to in a minute. Number 2, they should be sane. Sorry if anyone is here and you are insane, it is haram for you, or rather your contract would be invalid. Yes, I'm going to assume everybody here is sane. Number 3, you have to have full awareness of the contract you're making, the implications of the contract that you're making. You have to be conscious that you're making this contract. For example, God forbid if you were drunk, God forbid if you had hit your head and were feeling dizzy, are you fully aware of what you're doing? No, you're not. So the contract is invalid, it's batil from its very foundation. But similarly, to its nth degree, you have to be aware as to the things that you are signing up to. Especially to the extent of your obligations. If you are signing up to something that you don't understand, normally we would say you have to get a lawyer to be able to explain it to you. From the Islamic perspective, if you sign up to something without understanding your duties within it, it can be that the contract is going to be invalidated from its foundation. Number 4, free will. Meaning, you cannot be forced into something. Now, there's a lot of nuance around this. But we don't need to go into too much because largely speaking it won't affect us. But if you imagine, if you are living in Iraq during the time of Saddam, Saddam would literally come, his goons would literally come to Shia areas and say, what's your house worth? What's your house worth? Let's just say for the sake of it, it's worth 100,000. He would say, I'm going to offer you 50,000 and you have 1 week to leave. And this is how he used to get rid of Shia out of areas in Baghdad, areas, until those areas were completely. Is it permissible for you to accept that deal at half price based on coercion? These are masail that were very real masail that come about. But principally, you have to have free will in what you're doing. You cannot get married, you cannot enter into the aqdun nikah without your free will in doing so. You cannot enter into any contract, employment or employee unless you have free will that you're signing up to what you are signing up to. And lastly, that you have ownership of that item or guardianship or authorization. So, can you sell something that's not yours? You can actually. We'll come to that in a... If you guys were shopkeepers, if I was having a conversation with shopkeepers, sometimes, let's say it's Dhuhr time. So you say to the next guy, the next shopkeeper, listen, I'm going to go off for 20 minutes. I'm going to go pray my salah. Can you look after the shop for me? It's not his items. I come along and I want to purchase something for you from the market, from your shop. Samir wants to purchase it, sell it to me. Can he do it? It's not his item. It doesn't belong to him. Can he do it? Yes, he can. But there are extensive rulings as to what this means and what its implications are. Let's say you sell it to me. He comes back. Rashid uncle comes back. He said, I'm not happy with the price that you sold it for. What happens now? Is it upon you to make up the shortfall? Is it upon me? Is it upon him? All these come about. If you were shopkeepers, I would go into that mas'ala in detail because you would need it. So if anyone needs it, because this is your business, then let me know. And we can talk about it in detail. Principally, you must be the owner of what you are selling. In some secondary circumstances, Samir can sell Rashid's things to me in his absence without him even knowing about it. Those are secondary rulings. But as you can see here, the principle is, no, you must have ownership over it. Let's just talk about, number one, maturity. My friend Nazir is sitting there. How old are you? 11, mashallah. Nazir, does Dad allow you to go into Tesco and buy anything that you want? Yeah? Yeah? That's interesting. Oh, it's a change. Dad's nudging him. No, say no. Huh? No, you can tell us. It's okay, honestly. Waitrose, yes. Do you go into Waitrose and purchase anything? Mercedes. Let me give you an example. Have you ever gone into Waitrose and purchased a chocolate for yourself? No, not in Waitrose. He's going to be a lawyer when he grows up. That kind of answer. Have you ever gone into a shop and bought yourself anything? Yeah. What have you bought? What's the last thing that you bought? Maybe sweets. Ahsant, good answer. Is there anything more expensive that you've bought? So for example, have you ever bought yourself, I don't know, a £50 Lego set? Okay. Can you in Islam buy a £50 Lego set? You yourself, can you walk into the entertainer and purchase it? You think so? That's good. Okay, excellent. So here we have a real mas'ala. Can someone who is not baligh make independent transactions? For example, as simple as a small purchase or even a large purchase. Can a non-baligh person make a wasiyah, testimony? It might be that there's certain things that belong to him. He wants to be able to say, look, God forbid, I have an illness, I'm going to pass away. Can he make a will that's binding in Sharia? Can Nazir get married? He's looking really worried now, huh? Can you see? Now, we know, especially in certain Muslim countries, that there will be young children that are getting married. They're not yet baligh. The parents marry them off, and then once they become baligha, for example, it becomes consummated. Are they allowed to do that? You see here, what did the contract say? Requirements for contracts. Number one, you have to be mature. We're talking about Islamic maturity here, baligh. And number 4, you have to have free will. The boy and the girl have to have entered into the contract themselves, not be told by your parents, by the way, you're now married. How many times has it happened in India, in Pakistan, in East Africa, in Arabia, till now? Let's be honest. Every moment of every day it's happening. Are they mature? No. Are they doing it out of free will? No. Birthday comes along, mashallah, you're baligha now. By the way, you two are married. True or not, it happens every single day. And then immediately they enter into a marriage, and that's all they know of. See, these rules can be very real to very different people depending on their circumstances. So now, there are many ahadith from Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam that deal with the issue of whether a baligh person can or cannot make any transactions, contracts. And what we talk about here is if you are mumayyiz, a discerning child, sabi al-mumayyiz, you're not yet baligh, you're not baligh, are you, Nazir? But if he's discerning, what does discerning mean? Discerning means he or she knows right from wrong in the context of the thing that they're doing, and they are mature enough to be aware of the purchase that they're making and the value of the transaction that they're getting involved in. Some maraji' allow Sabi al-Mumayyiz, a child who is discerning, capable of displaying a degree of independence, they allow Nazir to be able to engage in contracts for himself. Some maraji' say he can do minor contracts independently. Some maraji' say his guardian has to oversee the contracts that he's engaged in. So, Rasul pulls up to the petrol station. Nazir wants to go and buy a chocolate. Some maraji' say it's not permissible at all for him to go in and purchase a chocolate. Some will say as long as dad is in the car and aware of what's going on, it's permissible. Some will say he's independent. Rationally, he can make this decision for himself. It's his 50p, it's his money. He can decide to go and purchase a Snickers. But nothing more than very simple transactions. Okay? So I'll mention some of the maraji' and what their opinions are. As an example, a child is permitted to make transactions with the permission of his guardian. Allam al-Hilli, Ayatollah Sayyid Kadhim al-Yazdi, and in our era, Ayatollah Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim, grand marja of his time, said a child who is discerning can make transactions with the permission of the guardian. Ayatollah Sistani's position. Mas'ala 2090 in his Risala Amaliyah, Ayatollah Sistani says, to conduct business with a child who is not baligh and who makes a deal independently of his guardian, not baligh and independent of his guardian, it is invalid, it is void, except if it is of a small value. Yeah? If it's a really small value, your child can do what they want to be able to do that. In cases in which transactions, children are normally able to discern. But if a discerning child is accompanied by his guardian and accepts the confirmation of the deal, whatever the transactions are, the child can do. Nazir, if he's discerning, can go and purchase himself a nice Mercedes as long as Rasul is with him. Okay? Make sense? So sometimes we have our kids, they're purchasing things, they might go to school, they want to buy a raffle ticket, they want to go in and buy something. When I was young, when I was 10, 11, 12, if I had won a competition, a Quran competition, I might got £50, £100, I would go and spend it on an item for myself. Was I allowed? You see? These are real masail. Others...
Excuse me, why if the parents, insane?
then it will become on the guardian. So the guardianship goes father and then paternal grandfather.
All right, they're not around then.
Yes. It will fall on one of the guardians to be present. As long as one of the guardians is there, they can accept the transaction on his behalf. Other marajih say, assuming the intelligence of the sabi al-mumayyiz, the child who is discerning, and their ability to make a correct contract, they can do so on their own accord. And those include Ayatollah Jawad Mughniya, whose book we were studying last week, and Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Taqi al-Mudarrisi of Karbala. Nazir, in this example, as long as it's proven he has a good track record that he has made savvy purchases and doesn't blow all his money on sweets in one day, he can go and make his purchases within relative reason. So this is who can make a contract. Any questions? Fairly simple? Good. Let's skip to the next part, inshallah. So in the next part of your slides, in the next part of your the printouts that we sent, it comes to circumstances in which you can withdraw from a contract. Khiyar literally means choice. In this context, it means that you have a choice to withdraw from contract. You purchase something, you're engaged in a contract. When are you allowed to be able to withdraw and not? The reason why this is important is in certain circumstances, there are contracts which are called aqdul lazim. Lazim means compulsory. It's compulsory for you to fulfill this contract. In other cases, Sharia has what is known as aqdul jaiz. It's jaiz for you to withdraw from those contracts. If you have aqdul lazim, are you allowed to withdraw? And if so, in which cases are you allowed to withdraw? Now, let's imagine you and I, we make a purchase and a sale. I walk into your shop, I buy from you a TV. This is aqd lazim. It's both sides. You've agreed to sell me the TV, I've agreed to purchase the TV. It's lazim. It's compulsory upon us to fulfill the contract. But what happens if I'm not satisfied with the product? This is when you are allowed khiyar, to withdraw from the contract. You can go back to the Muslim owner and say, there's something wrong with this TV. I didn't agree to this purchase in this way, therefore I want my money back. Can he or she say no? It depends on whether you have met the requirements to prove as to why you are dissatisfied with the purchase. Let us mention it very briefly. It's quite simple, but you'll see it here. Number one, if you have been overcharged, khiyar al-ghaban. Ghaban, in my language, I would translate as being cheated. Overcharging is a relative concept, isn't it? Right now, I feel like I'm being overcharged when I go and get petrol. Can I go back to Shell and go, no, I'm not happy with this now. I'm not paying 175. If you walk into a local Tesco's, sometimes things can be 50, 100% more expensive, can't they? You want to buy, let's say last minute you go buy some apples. You're like, whoa, this is well expensive. But you need it because you got guests coming over now. Have they overcharged you? They have. Are you allowed to say that I want my money back? No. Why not?
Because you already know it's expensive.
Because you already know it's expensive, and because the urf we have commonly come to accept that when you purchase something from a Tesco Express, there's going to be a 60% surplus upon it. So in that context, you're willing to accept 60% on top of the regular price. But if I sold you a house at 60% over, that would definitely be overcharging you. And it would be unacceptable normally in the eyes of the urf, in the eyes of the common people. So overcharging here has to be relative. If you feel you've been overcharged, it has to be on the condition that it actually within the urf is considered to be overcharging. Have a read in the paragraph. Two circumstances may apply with regard to being overcharged. One, the difference between the price charged and the current market value, whether it's substantial or not, or whether it's just a negligible amount that you are being overcharged. Have a look at the next page, page 84 in your printouts. Second paragraph. The above ruling that you can withdraw from your contract when you're being overcharged is based on the principle Islam does not occasion harm. What was the principle? La dharar. Islam does not allow harm to come to you. If you're being overcharged such that it's going to harm your pocket or be unfair upon you, you're permitted to be able to go back and say, being overcharged here, I withdraw from the contract, I want my money back. Now that's quite obvious, no one's going to dispute that, that's normal. But have a read of the next paragraph. This is very interesting in how we need to navigate business laws and business ethics amongst ourselves. During the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, some traders tried to meet caravans bringing goods prior to their arrival into the city. So for example, there was caravans coming. They used to go out of Medina, meet the caravans 100 miles outside so that they could purchase things. What would happen? The people bringing the caravans back didn't know what prices were going to be acceptable in Medina. The traders used to undercut what would be happening in Medina by so much that it wasn't fair on the traders and it wasn't fair on the people in Medina. The Prophet prohibited this action because you've undercut people so much that he stopped that transaction from being halal. This is very important. Sometimes it's overpriced and sometimes it's so undercut that harm is being done. Now normally good business people feel like if I can get a deal out of this, I'm on to a winner. Islam doesn't allow that in this context. If you are overcharging someone so much, or you are undercharging someone so much, and harm is going to occur in either context, that aqd is batil in the eyes of Islam. I'll give you a practical example of how this becomes real. Imagine you are doing private work, private dentistry work, and you're a specialist, or sometimes you might be a plastic surgeon. The work that you're doing is so specific, so particular, you might be the only specialist in town. No one else can do it. So you have the right to charge whatever you want. Allowed or not allowed? Allowed or not allowed? Not allowed. Why? Qa'id ad-dharar. Islam does not permit harm to come to people. Let's say you are in a position where you can, you're dealing with insurance or you're dealing with the NHS. So you're able to charge whatever you want. If it's unreasonably high, higher than what the urf would accept as a reasonable amount, it's haram for you. That money is not permitted for you. I'll give you a practical example. If Akil was here, it would be really useful. Akil is doctor. Hospital says, if you don't, we need a locum. We need someone to come cover for us. He says, no problem, I'll come tonight. £150 an hour. His normal, I'm sorry because it's personal, but it's known what locums get paid, right? Let's just say £60 an hour. So normally he can raise it. He can go, you know what, tonight, £70. Acceptable or not? Acceptable. So small increase, relative. £80 an hour, allowed or not? £90 an hour, allowed or not? £150 an hour, allowed or not? Can you see? It's actually a real thing. It's very easy for anyone in business to be able to charge more than is required, than is normal. And similarly, you can undercut someone else in business so much that it causes another person harm. The Prophet said, La dharar wa la dhirar. You are not allowed to cause harm to yourself or to others. In that case, it would become batil. So, can Dr. Akil charge £150 an hour? Nodding his head, yes. What would it be based on? Whether the urf accept it, whether the emergency is normal that it would allow such an extensive rate, hourly rate, or whether it doesn't cause harm or not. Does the NHS have the budget for it? Can you see? Those sorts of questions would be the questions that have to be asked and whether you can ask. Someone might be a plumber. You know, Christmas Day, he gets called out. Can I charge £100 an hour? Any of you plumbers here? And then there's many more khiyar. You can read it in your own time. Does this khiyar, if you want to withdraw from a contract, you've been overcharged, can you do it immediately or do you have to wait? Are you allowed to wait? How long are you allowed to wait? The answer is mentioned. Khiyar at-tadlis, deceit. If someone has been deceitful upon you, you can withdraw from the contract. Khiyar al-aib, if there is a defect in what you have purchased, you can withdraw from the contract. Khiyar al-ru'ya, page 89. If you've seen the item and then they send you another item that is not the one you specified, you can pull out of the contract as you want. All of these are normal things for you to be able to do. And then the last is chapter number 8, which is from page 97 to 99, also in your printouts that have been sent to you, that the terms and conditions in the contracts. You are not allowed to be able to make a condition that is against the Quran or against the Sunnah. For example, when a person is getting married, the husband or the wife make a condition upon the other? If I'm getting married, can I say to my future wife, we'll marry, but I don't want you to wear hijab? Can I put that into the aqd al-nikah? Can I put that into the contract? No, I can't. Why? It's not within the Quran Sunnah. It's against the Quran and Sunnah. Can, for example, the wife, when she's making a contract with me, say, whatever, can the wife say, I only ever want to be able to live in Leeds? Can the wife say, I don't want ever to be able to be moved out of the UK? I don't want to be moved to India, for example. Can you see? These are questions that might come up in real terms. Anything that is against the Quran and Sunnah is not permitted. And many times you can see that even the author puts certain examples when people do put things down. For example, in page 98 of your book, point 1.1, it is not acceptable for a husband to stipulate conditions to obviate his contractual obligations. Husband says, we'll marry, but I don't want to have to pay any of the nifaq. I don't want to have to look after you. I don't want to be able to have to put a roof over your head. Similarly, in 1.3, Ibn Bukair narrates on the authority of Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, he was told about a prospective wife who, in exchange for getting married, wanted to exercise control over their sex life, right to divorce, and wanted to release her husband from paying mahar. Can a wife stipulate these things in the contract? No, she cannot. Similarly, the husband cannot stipulate things that are against the Quran and the Sunnah. So what was principle number 5 that we said? قواعد فقهية. كل ما يوافق مع القرآن والسنة فهو جائز. Whatever is in line with the Quran and Sunnah, it is permitted for you, and whatever is against the Quran and Sunnah is not permitted for you. So tonight, inshallah, we have looked at these 5 qawaid and how to be able to apply them in certain very simple ways. We asked who can make a contract. We asked when are you allowed to break a contract, withdraw from a contract, and what can you stipulate within a contract. In the book, you can find all the reading that gives you a little bit more than I have provided you, but at least for tonight, it gives you some insight as to how you are able to make and break a contract. And inshallah, it provides you with enough for tonight. And then I'm sure there are questions that are going to come. I leave the floor for you to be able to discuss whatever you'd like. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa salli ya Rabbi ala khiratika min khalqik Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin. So, I don't know if any questions have come through on Menti or
In Sayyid Sistani's ruling, how much is a small transaction? What's the definition of small?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In Sayyid Sistani's ruling, how much is a small transaction? Small transaction is defined by the urf. If you are living, for example, in Dubai, small transactions might be slightly increased. What people relatively consider to be small, because their cost of living is higher, their standards of living might be higher. You yourself may be a very affluent family. What's ordinary purchase for you as a really affluent family in Dubai might be something 50 or 100 pounds. Whereas someone living here, for example, a small purchase may be what Nazir mentioned, some chocolates, some sweets. So Sayyid Sistani would refer you back to the urf and your own family unit and what is common for you in your circumstances. Nice question. Anything else on Menti?
If a wife says, I will marry you only if you don't take me to Pakistan, would you say that's a good reason to?
I can't say if it's a good reason or a not good reason to. The question is it legally permissible for her to make that stipulation? Firstly, is it against, well, let's go back. If the wife says, I'll marry you, but you're not allowed to take me to Pakistan, for example, in this question, is it permissible or not permissible for her to make that shart, that condition in the contract? Firstly, principle number 5, is it muwafiq with the Quran or is it against the Quran? Is it against the Quran or Sunnah? Did the Prophet ever say, you cannot take someone to Pakistan? No. So number 1, it is not against the Quran and Sunnah. So if she wants to make that condition, she can make that condition. It's allowed. If in the urf, this type of condition was unacceptable, unreasonable, aqliyan, then maybe the marja might interject and say, this is irrational. It's not permissible to make an irrational demand, shart, stipulation in a contract. If it is not irrational, then there's no problem with her making that contract, that stipulation in the contract. It's not going to invalidate the contract, and it's upon you to, if you accept the contract, it's wajib for you to uphold the contract.
For example, in around Saddam days, one would say, I can't live there because of the situation.
Then that's a different situation. That's rational. She's fearing for her safety. If, for example, I don't want to go back to Pakistan because you and your family have a history of forcing women, their family members, to stay in Pakistan against their will, then she can put that condition in the contract. If it's in Saddam's era and there's war, violence, threats of, God forbid, rape, and her safety is at risk, what was the second principle, third principle? Qa'idat la dharar. So does her principle Is her stipulation because of the potential harm upon her? Yes. Is it rational for her to make that stipulation? Yes. Are you allowed to potentially do something that puts her into harm's way? No. Therefore, it would be jaiz for her to put that particular condition in the contract. Can you see? It's relative. That's why I said go back to these 5 principles. The first one was, is it yuwafiq ma'al Quran and Sunnah or not? Second, is it contravening dharar or not? And you'll get your answer.
Can a wife stipulate for the husband not to do muta while married to her?
Can a wife stipulate for the husband not to do mut'ah whilst married to her? Yes, it is permissible.
It's against the Quran. The Quran that is.
So, mut'ah is not wajib upon you. Yeah? So, if she puts in the principle, put in the stipulation into the aqd that she does not want you to do it, it does not go against the Quran. The Quran makes it permissible for you to do mut'ah. It doesn't make it wajib for you to do mut'ah. So for her to say, I don't allow you to do this, it is permissible for her to put the stipulation, and it's permissible for you to accept the stipulation as well.
Then isn't she, but you're actually changing it because the religion gives the option. So for example, 4 marriages. Yeah. How can that someone go against that principle? Although I'm not sort of
Yeah, advocating, yeah.
But the reason for that, if Islam allows you, who are you then put a condition upon the opposite person not to abide by?
Because you are both free to be able to accept conditions in life that limit you in certain ways. The same way, if you remember principle number 1, what was principle number 1 amongst the qawaid fiqhiyah? الناس مسلطون على أموالهم. Do you remember that one? People are in authority over their own wealth. They're in authority over their own lives. Principally, you can dispose of your own wealth or your own being as you please, so long as it is not against the Quran and Sunnah. Against meaning asking you to do something haram. Are you allowed to do something that limits what is mustahab for you? Yes. Are you allowed to do something that limits something that is mubah upon you? Yes, you are.
The final question.
Does that answer your question, yeah? That's why it's allowed in the contract.
What is urf?
What is urf? Nice question. Urf is the common practice of intelligent people. Normal, intelligent, rational people, and their practice in a locality is what is known as urf in Islam. So in this context, whatever is normal within our society in Leeds or in Britain, that would be considered the urf. So if I give you a simple example, simple example. For husbands, it is wajib for you to do infaq, wajib nafaqa, for you to look after the needs of your family members, correct? It's wajib upon all husbands to do that. Everybody knows? And wajib upon all fathers to look after the financial needs of their family members. The urf is relative. The amount that it's going to cost you in Leeds is different to the amount it might cost you in Bangladesh. So the urf would determine what the financial expectations are of a family unit per locality, per family. If you are a multi-millionaire and you marry a multi-millionaire, the expectation that that wife has is going to be here in terms of what is normal for her standards of living. Therefore, it is wajib upon you to do infaq, to make sure your upkeep of her is at the level of the urf, what is relative to her standards. But if she was a very poor person in Bangladesh, the standards would be at the urf levels of Bangladesh, just as an example.
For example, she moves from Bangladesh to the UK. The urf would be of the locality in which she
The urf would be in the local. She would know, if you move from Bangladesh to London, you could not keep her at Bangladesh standards. You have to then keep her at relative standards of London. Now, whether that's North London, South London, that's different. London. But you could not be allowed to keep her at Bangladesh levels of income and sustainability. In terms of what is wajib upon you, shelter, clothing, food, electricity, warmth, hospital bills, all of that you would be responsible for in the urf.
education.
Would you be responsible for your wife's education? No, because she's already baligha. Her emotional well-being, yes, you'll be responsible for her emotional well-being.
Sheikh, I think we'll take this last question.
Last question.
So in the current climate, a shopkeeper have made forward purchase, so they've purchased rice at say £5, but it's now retailing at £35. So can they raise the price to sell it at the current level, to take advantage of
Okay, so I'll just repeat the question because there might be someone online. In the current climate, the shopkeepers have made a forward purchase, bay' as-salam. Can they raise the price of the food at all? Yes, absolutely you can. As long as it is not harming. Yeah. If you raise the price so high that it becomes unaffordable and unsustainable for ordinary people in your local community, then it goes against qa'idat la dharar, no harm. Islam does not permit you to do harm. At that point it would become haram for you to sell it at the exorbitant price. But if £35 is the normal price, you can purchase it for 5, sell it for 25, sell it for 35, whatever. What you can't do, purchase it at 5, sell it for 10, that undercuts everybody so badly that you destabilize the market, because that would also be dharar, harm. So you cannot overprice it so much and you cannot underprice it so much that it causes harm and instability to people's lives or the general economy. It goes for anything in your businesses, anything in your transactions. You might be dealing with tiles, marbles, you might be dealing with medicines, you might be dealing with anything. These are the principles that you would have to abide by.
I have a question.
Sure.
So you enter into a contract, and it's not it's haram because it's as explained as the Sunnah or the Quran. You're not aware of this. What happens when you've gone into this contract, a marriage contract, and it's there?
And then later you come to know of it.
Then what happens?
Brilliant. Go back to your go back to the second principle. Which principle answers your question? So the question was, you've put a condition, a shart in the contract. At the time you thought it was halal, you later come to know it's haram. What's the principle?
Everything is halal.
كل شيء حلال حتى تعرفوا or تعرف أنه حلال أنه حرام. Everything is permissible until you know otherwise. So the moment you know otherwise, that shart would be dropped from your contract. The rest of the contract remains. But that one particular shart that was impermissible really in the reality with God, once you have come to know of it, it drops.
So, for example, I think specifically.
Okay, specifically,
For example, a couple gets married.
couple gets married.
The husband stipulates you can't wear hijab, and the wife stipulates you can't keep a beard. Obviously, we know that that's haram from the beginning, but they stipulated this for.
Once they come to know it,
Once they come to know what?
well, the urf here is subservient here to the specific principle. So we have an evidence. The principle comes first before the urf in this case. So once they come to know of it, their marriage contract remains a marriage contract, but that shart is no longer applicable. Or it was never applicable in the first place, but now they cannot enforce it upon one another. So him saying, I don't want you wearing hijab, and her abiding by it, agreeing to it, it was always invalid, But now that they come to know of it, it is invalid for them to be able to practice it. If they practice it now, it becomes a sin upon them, in which that they would then be responsible to Allah. Why? كُلُّ مَا يُوَافِقْ مَعَ الْقُرْآنِ. Contracts can only be in accordance with the Quran and not against the Quran and Sunnah. If the shart was foundational to the contract, in an aqd nikah, let's say, I say, you cannot wear hijab. Is that contract essential to the aqd nikah or not? Yes or no? You understand what I mean by essential? Does the aqd nikah continue with or without that shart that they've made? Yes or no? Yes. It's still a marriage, right? Irrespective. So in this circumstance, the shart drops. It means it's no longer applicable. In other circumstances, if your shart was essential to the contract itself, you and I are going to work with each other. We're going to make a business contract. I'm going to be the employer, you're going to be the employee, on the condition that you cannot pray your salah. Our working together is based on you accepting not to do salah, then the contract itself would be batil. In the case of the aqd nikah, the contract is still valid. It's the shart that drops. So it depends on the contract in particular and what contract is being made and what is essential to the contract and what is secondary to the contract or incidental to the contract, as to whether the contract drops or the shart drops. Make sense? Yeah? Inshallah. Okay. We'll conclude with one line of gham for Imam alayhi salam, as it is Thursday night, and we have dedicated this majlis to one of our marhumeen that passed away only a few hours ago, yesterday morning. We are told by some of our scholars, Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam put a contract in her aqd nikah with her husband Abdullah bin Ja'far, and said that when Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam rises, I am allowed to be able to leave to go and assist Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Had this been impermissible for her to raise, she would never have raised it. If this had been impermissible for Abdullah to accept, he would never have accepted it. But both of them accepted this. It is said that with this permission, she was able to go and support Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam based on the stipulation in her contract. You can imagine that when she returns back from Karbala, back from Kufa and Sham, the state that Zainab alayhi salam is in. As she enters into her house, it is said that her husband calls out and says, "Oh lady, it is improper for you to be in this house." She immediately responds by saying, "Oh my husband Abdullah, do you not recognize your beloved Zainab?" Zainab's state had changed. Her back had become bent. Her face had changed with the amount of grief and the weakness that she had undergone. And you can imagine what Abdullah must have felt like when he recognized his beautiful wife Zainab alayhi salam in that moment. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. Ya Allah, there are many people around the world going through such desperate times. Aid them bihaqqi Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam. And we ask you, Ya Allah, help us to be able to fulfill our contracts in the best of ways, and help us to be able to learn the laws that are upon us. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa salli ya Rabbi ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alihi.